A princess among stars. The crystalline spires of the Stellarian Imperial Palace caught the light of 3 setting suns, casting prismatic shadows across Princess Lyra's chambers. She stood at the viewport, her iridescent scales shifting from deep purple to midnight blue as she contemplated the news her most trusted advisor had just delivered. The Eternal Council, backbone of the Stellarian Empire for 10,000 years, had been compromised. Your Highness, Advisor Ven's voice trembled, his normally composed demeanor cracking under the weight of his words. The evidence is irrefutable. High Chancellor Moros has been orchestrating a silent coup for the past 3 cycles. Nearly half the council supports him. Lyra's 4-fingered hand pressed against the transparent alloy of the viewport. Below, the capital city of New Arcturus sprawled across the planet's surface like a glittering web, its citizens going about their lives unaware that their civilization stood on the brink of collapse. "And my father?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. The Emperor hadn't been seen in public for months, his diplomatic missions to the outer colonies becoming increasingly lengthy and mysterious. "Detained, Your Highness. Officially, he's in deep meditation at the Temple of Eternal Light." In reality, Ven's voice trailed off. Lyra closed her inner eyelids, a gesture of deep contemplation among her people. Her father had warned her about this possibility, had trained her since childhood to recognize the signs of impending upheaval. The Stellarian Empire's peace had lasted for millennia. But peace bred complacency, and complacency bred opportunity for those willing to seize power. "The contingency protocols?" she asked, turning to face her advisor. "Already activated, Your Highness. But we have to move now. The Chancellor's forces will be here within." The explosion rocked the palace before he could finish. Emergency force fields snapped into place as alarms began wailing throughout the complex. Lyra's personal guard burst through the doors, their crystalline armor gleaming. "Your Highness, we must evacuate immediately," the captain announced, her voice steady despite the chaos. "The palace defenses have been compromised." Lyra grabbed the small pendant her father had given her on her last naming day, a quantum key containing the Empire's most closely guarded secrets. As she moved toward the door, another explosion shook the building, closer this time. The sound of plasma weapons and energy shields clashing echoed through the corridors. They ran through the palace's emergency passages, passages that had existed for millennia but never been used. Behind them, the sounds of fighting grew closer. Lyra's guard took positions at key intersections, sacrificing themselves one by one to buy her more time. The evacuation hangar was chaos when they arrived. Loyal staff and nobles scrambled for ships as traitors' forces pushed their way in. Lyra's personal shuttle waited, its engines already spinning up for immediate departure. "Your Highness," a voice called out. She turned to see Chancellor Moros himself striding across the hangar, flanked by elite guards in black armor. His usual benevolent smile had been replaced by something predatory. "Surely there's no need for such a hasty departure. The Empire is simply evolving. Your cooperation would make this transition much smoother." Lyra felt Ven's hand on her arm, urging her toward the shuttle. She met Moros's gaze, letting her scales shift to the deep red of royal authority. "The Empire exists to serve its people, Chancellor, not to serve the ambitions of those who would destroy 10,000 years of peace for their own gain." She turned and ran for the shuttle as plasma bolts began flying. Ven pushed her inside just as a bolt caught him in the back. Their eyes met one final time before the hatch sealed. The shuttle's automated systems took over, breaking free of the hangar and accelerating hard toward space. Behind her, the palace, her home for all her life, burned. As the shuttle reached the upper atmosphere, she noticed something wrong with the navigation systems. Someone had sabotaged them, launching her on a desperate course toward the Empire's outer rim. The last thing Lyra saw before emergency stasis activated was a small blue-green planet growing larger in her viewport, an uninhabited world in a quiet arm of the galaxy, far from any Imperial presence, a world called Earth. The Shepherd's Discovery. Sarah Chen had seen a lot of strange things during her years with Rocky Mountain search and rescue, but nothing quite like this. The morning had started normally enough. A report of unusual lights in the sky over Mount Evans, probably another meteor. But as she and Zeus, her German Shepherd rescue dog, tracked through the fresh snow, she knew this was different. The impact site was surprisingly small, maybe 20 feet across. At its center sat what looked like a teardrop-shaped pod of some kind, its surface decorated with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as she watched. Zeus whined softly, his ears pricked forward with interest rather than alarm. "Easy boy," Sarah murmured, adjusting her grip on her rescue pack. The sun was just cresting the mountain, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. The pod's surface had a similar iridescent quality, reminding her of soap bubbles or oil on water. Zeus suddenly barked and bounded forward. Sarah's heart jumped. She'd been so fascinated by the pod she'd almost forgotten her primary duty as a rescuer. If something had crashed here, there might be someone inside who needed help. As she approached, a section of the pod's surface became transparent, revealing a figure inside. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The being was humanoid but clearly not human. Its skin had a scaled texture that shifted colors like the pod's surface, and its features were more elegant and angular than any human's. "Control, this is Chen," she keyed her radio. Static was her only reply. Looking back at the pod, she noticed how the snow seemed to curve around it, as if some kind of field was keeping it isolated. That probably explained the radio interference too. Zeus whined again, pawing at the pod's surface. The figure inside stirred slightly. Still alive, then. Sarah had a decision to make. Protocol for unusual situations was clear. Secure the site, call for backup, wait for authorities. But something about this felt different. The pod's occupant needed help, and that was exactly what Sarah had sworn to provide. Sarah studied the pod's surface, looking for any kind of release mechanism. Zeus kept circling, his behavior showing none of the anxiety he usually displayed around dangerous situations. If anything, he seemed concerned for the being inside. "Okay," Sarah muttered to herself, "think this through." The pod's occupant was clearly in distress, possibly injured. Whatever had brought them here, they needed help. That was what mattered right now. The rest, the questions, the implications, the protocols, could wait. She reached out to touch the pod's surface. It was warm despite the freezing temperature, and as her fingers made contact, the patterns shifted and swirled around her hand. A seam appeared, then widened, becoming an opening large enough to reach inside. The alien princess, something about her bearing just screamed royalty, was unconscious but breathing. Her scaled skin had taken on a pale, almost translucent quality that Sarah suspected wasn't normal. When she checked for a pulse, she found it, faster than a human's, but steady. Zeus nosed his way forward, gently sniffing the alien's hand before giving it a soft lick. To Sarah's surprise, the princess's eyes fluttered open. All three of them. The outer two were a striking violet color, while the center eye was a deep gold. She tried to speak, but only managed a weak whisper in a language Sarah didn't understand. "Easy," Sarah said softly, the way she'd talked to any injured person she rescued. "You're safe. We're here to help." She kept her voice calm and gentle, hoping her tone would convey what her words couldn't. The princess's eyes focused on Zeus, who had settled his head near her hand, offering the comfort that only a dog can provide. A faint smile crossed her alien features, and she relaxed slightly. That's when Sarah's radio crackled to life. "Chen, come in. We're picking up some unusual readings from your location. Several vehicles are en route to investigate." Sarah looked down at the injured alien, then at Zeus, who met her gaze with complete trust. She made her decision. "Control, false alarm at my location. Just some weird atmospheric effects on some climbing gear someone lost. I'm heading back to base." She turned back to the princess. "I don't know if you can understand me, but we need to move. Something tells me we don't want to wait around to see who's coming to investigate. Hidden in plain sight, the old shepherd's cabin had been in Sarah's family for 3 generations. Nestled high in the mountains, far from the nearest town, it was the perfect place to hide someone who needed to stay out of sight. Getting there hadn't been easy. The princess, who had managed to communicate that her name was Lyra, was weak and disoriented. The cold wasn't helping either. Her species clearly wasn't adapted to Earth's winter temperatures. Sarah had managed to disguise Lyra in her own extra winter gear, making the alien look like just another rescued hiker from a distance. Zeus stayed close to Lyra's side the entire journey, offering support when she stumbled and warmth when she shivered. Now, 3 days later, Sarah stood at the cabin's window, watching fresh snow fall while Lyra slept near the fireplace. Zeus curled protectively at her feet. The princess was recovering quickly, and her grasp of English was improving at an astonishing rate. She seemed to have some kind of technological assistance, a translucent device behind her ear that glowed faintly when she spoke. "Your world is very beautiful," Lyra said softly, making Sarah turn. She hadn't realized the princess was awake, but very cold. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked, moving to check on her patient. "Stronger, thanks to you." And Lyra reached down to scratch Zeus behind the ears. "This loyal guardian. In all my travels, I've never encountered a creature quite like him." "Dogs are pretty special," Sarah agreed. "They can sense things about people that we can't. Zeus knew right away that you needed help, and that you weren't a threat." Lyra's scales shifted to a deep blue. Something Sarah had learned indicated sadness or regret. "I may not be a threat, but I have brought threat to your world. Those who forced me to flee my home, they will be looking for me. I should leave, find another place to go." Zeus whined and pressed closer to her, and Sarah shook her head firmly. "You're not going anywhere until you're fully recovered. Besides, Earth is a big planet, and if trouble does come looking, well," she smiled slightly, "you might find that humans aren't as helpless as we look." The princess was quiet for a moment, studying Sarah with all 3 eyes. "Why did you help me?" "Your protocols, your authorities. You risked much by bringing me here." Sarah considered the question carefully. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because you needed help, and I could provide it. Sometimes it's that simple." Simple. Lyra's scales shifted to a color Sarah hadn't seen before, a warm golden hue. "Perhaps that is what my people have forgotten. We have built an empire spanning galaxies, developed technologies beyond imagination. Yet we have lost sight of simple truths, like helping those in need." Their conversation was interrupted by Zeus, suddenly lifting his head, ears perked toward the door. Moments later, Sarah heard the distant sound of vehicles. "Stay here," she said, grabbing her binoculars. Through the swirling snow, she could make out 3 black SUVs making their way up the service road, the same road she deliberately avoided when bringing Lyra to the cabin. "They found me," Lyra said, her scales paling. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I never meant to." "Those aren't your people," Sarah cut her off, recognizing the vehicle's markings. "They're ours. Government agencies, probably drawn by whatever energy signature your pod was giving off." She turned to Lyra with a grim smile. "Time to find out if humans really are ready for first contact." The SUVs were getting closer. Sarah quickly moved through the cabin, her mind racing through options. Zeus stood alert, sensing the tension but remaining calm, his presence somehow reassuring both women. "Is there another way out?" Lyra asked, her scales shifting to a defensive pattern Sarah hadn't seen before. "There's a tunnel," Sarah replied, moving to the old fireplace. "The original shepherds used it to move their flocks during bad storms, but we don't need it. Not yet." She turned to face Lyra. "Do you trust me?" The alien princess met her gaze, all 3 eyes focusing intently. "You saved my life. You've protected me without question." "Yes, I trust you." Sarah nodded. "Then follow my lead. When the vehicles pulled up outside, Sarah was sitting calmly by the fire, Zeus at her feet. She'd helped Lyra arrange her winter gear to cover most of her alien features, positioning her in the shadows of the cabin's far corner. A firm knock came at the door. "Miss Chen," a male voice called out. "This is Agent Roberts with the Department of Defense. We need to speak with you about an incident 3 days ago." Sarah opened the door, letting in a blast of cold air and 3 serious-looking agents in dark suits. Zeus raised his head but remained calm, something that seemed to surprise the agents. "Beautiful dog," the lead agent, Roberts, commented. "German Shepherd. Search and rescue, right?" "That's right," Sarah replied evenly. "Zeus is one of our best. Now, what's this about?" Roberts studied the cabin's interior, his eyes lingering for just a moment on the shadowed corner where Lyra sat. "We detected some unusual atmospheric phenomena in your search area earlier this week. Your radio logs indicate you were first on scene." "Ah, that," Sarah nodded. "Yeah, I filed a report. Some kind of weather balloon or research equipment, I think, all twisted up in the rocks. No signs of anyone around it. And you didn't think to report this to other authorities?" Sarah shrugged. "I reported it to Search and Rescue Control. Above my pay grade to decide who else needs to know about lost equipment." She paused, then added, "Though I have to say, 3 SUVs of federal agents seems like overkill for a weather balloon." The other 2 agents had begun moving around the cabin's perimeter. One pulled out some kind of handheld device that beeped softly. "Sir," he called to Roberts, "we're getting readings similar to the crash site, but very faint. Could be residual." Roberts turned back to Sarah. "Mind if we look around?" "Got a warrant?" Sarah asked pleasantly. Zeus stood up, stretching casually but positioning himself between the agents and Lyra's corner. "Ms. Chen," Roberts' voice hardened slightly, "this is a matter of national security. Your cooperation would be appreciated." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "This cabin has been in my family for generations, Agent Roberts. Up here, property rights mean something. You want to look around, come back with a warrant. Until then, you're welcome to wait in your nice warm cars while I contact the family lawyer." The tension in the room was palpable. Robert stared at Sarah for a long moment, then at Zeus, who had sat down but remained alertly watching the agents. Finally, he nodded. "We'll be in touch, Ms. Chen." He gestured to his colleagues, and they filed out of the cabin. Sarah waited until she heard the vehicle start up and begin to move away before letting out a long breath. Zeus trotted over to Lyra, who had remained perfectly still throughout the encounter. "That," Lyra said quietly, "was either very brave or very foolish." "Maybe both," Sarah admitted, "but it bought us some time. They'll be back, though, and with a warrant next time." She turned to face the princess, "Which means we need to figure out our next move fast." The truth revealed. That night, as a storm howled outside the cabin, Lyra shared her full story. She spoke of the Stellarian Empire's long history, its achievements, and its recent corruption. She told of her father's efforts to prevent the coup, and of the quantum key she carried, containing not just state secrets, but evidence of crimes that could bring down Chancellor Moros and his conspirators. "The key is meant to be used with our networks, our technologies," Lyra explained, holding up the small crystalline pendant. "Without access to them, the information is useless." Sarah sat thoughtfully by the fire, absently scratching Zeus's ears. What if we could find a way to adapt it to Earth technology? I mean, physics is physics, right? The principles should be the same, even if our tech is more primitive. Lyra's scales shifted to a curious purple. "It's possible, but it would require." Sarah moved quickly to the window, then immediately stepped back. "Those aren't Earth aircraft," she said quietly. Lyra's scales paled. "Seekers, Moros' elite hunters. They must have traced my pod's energy signature." She stood, her movements still slightly unsteady. "I have to leave. Now. They'll destroy this place, and you, to get to me." Like hell, Sarah muttered, grabbing her emergency pack. Zeus, guard. The dog immediately moved to a defensive position near the door. There's a maintenance tunnel under the cabin. It leads to an old mining cave system, if we can reach it. The cabin's roof suddenly creaked ominously as something heavy landed on it. Dust and small debris rained down from the ceiling. Zeus's growl deepened. The tunnel, Sarah insisted, moving to the hidden entrance. Now, they barely made it through the trapdoor before the cabin's roof exploded inward. Sarah heard harsh voices speaking in an alien language she didn't understand, followed by the distinctive sound of energy weapons powering up. The maintenance tunnel was narrow and dark, illuminated only by Sarah's emergency flashlight. Zeus led the way, with Lyra between them, and Sarah bringing up the rear. The princess's scales now glowed faintly, providing additional light. They'll detect our heat signatures, Lyra warned as they moved deeper into the tunnel. Maybe not, Sarah replied. These old mines are geothermally active. Lots of heat signatures to confuse them. My grandfather used to say these mountains had a life of their own. They emerged into a larger cave chamber just as they heard the sound of pursuit behind them. Sarah played her flashlight across the cave walls, looking for the markers her family had maintained for generations. There, a faded blue arrow painted on the rock. This way, she whispered. There's an underground river chamber ahead. The water shoaled. Stop, the voice echoed through the cave, accompanied by the whine of charging weapons. 3 figures emerged from another tunnel, their armor gleaming with the same shifting patterns as Lyra's pod. Their helmets were opaque, but Sarah could feel their hostile intent. Princess Lyra, one of them stepped forward. By order of Chancellor Moros, you are to be taken into custody. The human and her beast will be eliminated as witnesses. Zeus growled, the sound amplified by the cave's acoustics. Sarah felt Lyra's hand grasp her arm. Wait, the princess said, her voice carrying the authority of her royal breeding. Your stellar guard. You swore an oath to the Empire, not to Moros. You know what he's done, what he's still doing. Orders are orders, Your Highness, the lead hunter replied, but Sarah noticed a slight hesitation in his stance. I have proof, Lyra continued, holding up her pendant. Proof of everything. The corruption, the murders, the betrayal of everything our empire stands for. Are you truly willing to kill innocents to help him cover up his crimes? The hunters glanced at each other. Behind them, Sarah heard more footsteps approaching. Whatever was going to happen would happen soon. That's when Zeus made his move. The dog lunged forward, not at the hunters but at the cave wall beside them. His paw hit a loose rock formation, and suddenly the chamber was filled with a deafening rumble. Down, Sarah yelled, pulling Lyra with her as part of the cave ceiling collapsed. The hunters scrambled backward, their energy weapons firing wildly into the darkness. When the dust settled, a new wall of rock separated them from their pursuers. Zeus stood proudly next to Sarah, tail wagging slightly. Good boy, Sarah coughed, patting his head. Those unstable formations finally came in handy. Lyra stared at the rock wall, then at Zeus. Your companion. He knew exactly where to hit to trigger that collapse. Sarah smiled. Zeus has been exploring these caves with me since he was a pup. He knows them better than anyone. She checked her emergency pack. But that won't hold them for long. We need to move. Wait, Lyra said, her scales shifting to a determined gold color. I need to show you something first. She held up her pendant. You mentioned adapting this to Earth technology. I think I know how we can do it. And if we succeed, we might be able to save both our worlds. 2 worlds united. The underground river chamber was vast, its walls glittering with mineral deposits that reflected their lights in strange patterns. The sound of rushing water echoed through the space, masking any noise of pursuit. Sarah had set up her emergency radio, and what few electronic devices she carried while Lyra examined them with intense interest. Sarah watched as Lyra carefully connected her pendant to the radio circuitry using thin strands of what looked like living metal from her clothing. Zeus kept watch at the chamber entrance, his ears constantly moving to track distant sounds. "Your encryption methods are fascinating," Lyra murmured as she worked. "Simple, but elegant, like using a basic language to express complex ideas." Her hands moved with precision, weaving alien technology and human electronics together. "There's something beautiful about finding solutions with limited resources. That's kind of humanity's specialty," Sarah said, holding her flashlight steady. "We're good at working with what we have." A sudden bark from Zeus warned them seconds before they heard voices echoing through the caves, both the harsh tones of the Stellar Guard and the more familiar sounds of human speech. The government agents had caught up and apparently joined forces with their alien counterparts. "They're converging on our position," Lyra said, her scales shifting anxiously. "The mineral content in these caves interferes with their tracking systems, but they'll find us soon enough." "How much longer?" Sarah asked. "Almost there." Lyra made a final adjustment. The pendant began to pulse with a soft light that synchronized with the radio's power indicator. "Now we just need to transmit the data, but the signal won't be strong enough to reach any significant distance from down here." Sarah grinned. "Maybe not on its own, but there's something my grandfather installed in these caves during the Cold War. He was a bit paranoid about government surveillance, had some interesting ideas about backup communications." She pointed her flashlight at the ceiling, revealing a network of metal cables running through the rock. "Old-school signal amplification system. Still maintained, still functional. If we can tap into that." The voices were getting closer. Zeus moved to stand between them and the approaching sounds, his posture alert but calm. "Sarah," Lyra said softly, "if this works, it will expose everything. Moro's crimes, the corruption, all of it. But it will also reveal my presence here, and yours. Your world may not be ready for that knowledge." "Maybe not," Sarah agreed, already working to connect their makeshift device to the cable network. "But they're even less ready for corrupt alien politicians using Earth as their personal hunting ground. Sometimes you have to take a stand." The first energy blast hit the wall near them just as Sarah made the final connection. The chamber erupted in chaos as both human agents and Stellar Guard poured in from multiple entrances. "Surrender the princess," the lead hunter demanded. "This is your last warning." Zeus stood his ground, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Sarah stepped forward, positioning herself next to him. "You know," she said conversationally, "the funny thing about these caves. Amazing acoustics. Every sound carries for miles, including radio signals." She held up the jury-rigged transmitter. "And right now, every government listening post, every amateur radio operator, every cell phone tower in a 100-mile radius is receiving proof of your conspiracy, in a format any Earth computer can read." "Impossible," one of the hunters scoffed. "Your primitive technology is surprisingly adaptable." Lyra cut him off, her scales blazing with royal authority. "Just like humans themselves." She addressed the other hunters directly. "You've seen the evidence now. You know the truth. Will you continue to serve a corrupted leader, or will you remember your oaths to the Empire itself?" For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the hunters lowered their weapons. The human agents, reading the shift in the room, followed suit. "The Empire exists to serve its people," the lead hunter said, removing his helmet to reveal scaled features similar to Lyra's. "All people. We forgot that perhaps, but no longer." He went down on one knee, the other hunters following. "Your Highness, we await your orders." Sarah felt Lyra's hand on her shoulder. "My first order," the princess said, "is to establish proper diplomatic relations with Earth, starting with the human who showed me that true nobility isn't about power or technology. It's about doing what's right, no matter the cost." She smiled. "And perhaps we could discuss an official role for K9 ambassadors as well." Zeus wagged his tail as the tension in the cave dissolved into relieved laughter. Sarah scratched his ears, knowing that while things would never be quite the same, change wasn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it took an alien princess, a loyal dog, and a mountain rescue worker to remind two civilizations of their better natures. As human agents began coordinating with the Stellar Guard to manage the impending first contact situation, Sarah looked at Lyra. So, canine ambassadors. Why not? Lyra's scales shifted to a warm, happy purple. After all, Zeus was the first to recognize me as a friend rather than a threat. Sometimes the simplest wisdom is the most profound. Sarah couldn't argue with that. As the cave filled with the busy sounds of two worlds coming together, she watched Zeus make friends with both humans and aliens alike, bridging gaps that moments ago had seemed insurmountable. Maybe that was humanity's gift to the universe, not our technology or our achievements, but our capacity to extend friendship and trust, even across the stars.